Hi, I'm Jason Alexander, or as you probably know me, Royal Flusher 25 from WSOP free-to-play app. WSOP players, I have some free chips just for you. Go hit the tables like the legends you are. Download the WSOP free-to-play app where you can win rings and bracelets and tournaments and show them off to everyone at the table.
If you love poker, play poker with 1 million extra chips using this promo code, WSOPFREE1M.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
This episode of the Race F1 podcast is sponsored by ZBiotics. ZBiotics is an absolute game changer because if, like me, you're in your mid-40s, having a night out with a few drinks can leave you feeling considerably worse the next day, and you can't bounce back the way you did when you were in your 20s. But with ZBiotics, you don't have to make that choice between having a great night or a great next day. There's a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. It's with pre-alcohol. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic Drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. And in the words of Jennifer Aniston, here's the science bit. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. So, just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Try it for yourself, and you will believe the hype. Go to zbiotics.com/race to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use RACE at the checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. That's the letter Z, or Z, if like me you're in the UK, BIOTICS.com/race and the code RACE at checkout for 15% off. One last time, zbiotics.com/race.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and Lando Norris won the Singapore Grand Prix, but that man Max Verstappen followed him home to limit the damage to his World Championship lead. So why was McLaren back to dominant form? What happened to Ferrari's challenge, and how did Red Bull turn around a weekend that started so badly? I'm Ed Straw, and joining us to spill the beans are Mark Hughes and Scott Mitchell-Malm. Well, Scott, how did you enjoy Singapore?
Yeah, it was fun.
Big day for the championship, wasn't it?
It could be, we'll see.
And what a win for Lando Norris.
Yeah, he did well.
I'd say it's not like you to be light on things to say, Scott. What's going on?
I'm just worried I'm going to get fined, Ed. So you'll feel free to ask me these questions after the podcast, and I'll answer them there.
You're doing a Max Verstappen, are you? You're doing a clever.
It's I'm just paying homage to probably my highlight of the weekend from Singapore. The race itself left a little bit to be desired, as it often does in Singapore, but the Verstappen antics against the bonkers FIA clamp down on swearing, fine in principle, but poorly executed this weekend. I enjoyed his stance and the way that he took it on. So yeah, paying a little bit of tribute.
Yeah, great bit of work from Max Verstappen. I'm sure everyone's heard about it. We will talk about it in a bit more depth later in the podcast. But Mark, you quite enjoyed that as well, because obviously you saw it playing out. You were in both his little bonus media scrums, weren't you?
I was, yeah. It's the first time I've actually been in a scrum which moved down 2 flights of stairs. And it was very funny. And he was totally open and fulsome in his answers once he was outside of the confines of the FIA. And he actually made a point of probably giving more detail than was really required, just to make the contrast more obvious.
It was very, very elegantly done from Max Verstappen. So, yeah, well done him for the way he played that. As I say, we'll talk about that in a bit more depth later on. But, yeah, it was one of the fun stories of the weekend and had a particularly serious side as well. So, Mark, let's get into the race. Singapore Grand Prix is always an interesting one. Some races of late have been very complicated. This one more straightforward. So how did it play out, and why was winner Lando Norris in a class of his own?
Yeah, it's the first Singapore Grand Prix without a safety car. Been coming here since 2008, and that's the first time that's happened, which made it obviously a lot more straightforward than it otherwise would have been. But even if we'd had safety cars, I'm pretty sure that we would have had a straightforward Lando Norris victory. It's just the places behind him might have been jumbled up a little. The McLaren was fantastic this weekend. It was super fast from Friday as soon as it started running, and it remained in that lovely window of balance throughout, no matter what the track did, no matter what the tire, how the tires were behaving on the surface and the temperature of the surface. It was always beautifully balanced to just give Norris in particular the confidence to really to push up against the walls. And it was just by far the fastest car around here. If you look at the previous two high downforce races, they were Zandvoort and Hungary, and the McLaren was utterly dominant at those races too. But its margin of advantage here was bigger than at either of those races. I think probably that's just a function of how the tyre behaviour was made even more. It just added to the advantage of its natural balanced downforce. And so, we had a lot of controversy coming in the weekend about, it's how on the low downforce tracks, its rear wing was flexing, but actually low downforce tracks are not its forte. High downforce tracks like this are.
Yeah, in fact, Andrea Stella called the rear wing thing a bit of a red herring in terms of the other teams objecting to it. Obviously, they did agree to make some changes to that wing, but obviously that's not a wing for here. It's one for a track like Baku or Monza or Spa. So they got their mileage out of it, so to speak. But Scott, this was just a sort of weekend that Norris needed, pretty much, wasn't it?
Yes, he was at one with the car pretty much from FP1. He was in a class of his own for pretty much every single session, especially when it counted. He finally aced the start, first time he's led into the first corner or led out the first corner and led the opening lap. I was a little bit concerned by the two near misses. Either one of those, just a few millimeters more, and it's curtains. Basically, it's not just a lost win. That could have ended his Grand Prix, and the championship would be definitely over. And there were one or two small moments where his race engineer was kind of urging him to just focus and bring the car home. That did kind of come after moments where he would up his pace or where they let him have a go for the fastest lap, which he did obviously hold until the very, very end. Controversially, lost it on at the very end with Daniel Ricciardo. So it wasn't like McLaren was totally worried that Norris was going to throw it away or anything like that, but it just needed to give him a little bit of a nudge here and there. And it's weird for a driver to have such a commanding victory and yet still have a couple of completely unprompted scares within it. And that worried me a little bit. I don't think it'll play on Norris's mind, really. I don't think he'll go away thinking, I won, but oh God, I've screwed up again. We know how self-critical he can be, so I wouldn't put it past him to have one or two thoughts like that. But so what I would say is that I'm stressing it because I think it has to be a concern when you have two unforced errors that could go as badly as they could have gotten, and one of them was super, super close to ending his race. I don't know if either of you two have seen the footage of them watching it in the cool down room, the top three, and they all make that kind of classic racing driver noise where you're watching it back and they're going, oh, like that. But so he really got away with that one. But generally speaking, it wasn't just a race and a race result that he needed the whole weekend. He was the number one McLaren driver from start to finish. He was absolutely excellent. He was super fast. And if he does that every weekend between now and the season, he will change my mind on whether or not there is a championship fight here.
Yeah, I think coming back to that point about the two mistakes, I do wonder if there's something about the fact that he doesn't like to take on liquids. He doesn't like to drink during a race. And after I think it was the second incident where, he just nudged the wall, where his engineer Will Joseph came on and said, "Concentrate, Lando, take a drink."
Yes.
He sort of had to be told to do that, and he referenced feeling a bit dizzy when he got out of the car afterwards. He just, he says it makes him feel nauseous to drink, but in this humid heat, to nearly 2 hours of effectively being in a sauna and not taking on liquids, you do wonder if that has an effect on occasional lapses of concentration, which is all that they were. So yeah, I don't know, but it does make you wonder.
Yeah, that's a kind of human performance thing they need to look a little bit into for future reference, I think. But yeah, certainly that moment at turn 16 when he got very close to the wall would have been. I imagine Norris made a similar noise to the one they made in the cool down room when looking at the replay.
It wasn't Norris who almost touched it last year and pulled George into it, because George was following, right in his wheel tracks. So you almost did it last year on that same corner, and George did do it.
And of course, it's a track where a lot of drivers do that and they kiss the wall and they have moments. But that first one in the first stint for Norris was, particularly extreme. But also, Scott, lots of talk about Norris versus Piastri, but this was a weekend on which Norris outclassed Piastri, wasn't it?
Yes, this was a Zandvoort style weekend. It wasn't. The good thing from Piastri's side is that I think he's banished the kind of weekends in the first half of the season. I'm thinking kind of Japan, China and Spain, where he's not just off Norris, he's nowhere. And obviously the McLaren performance has shifted. So it's a little bit like when Perez has off weekends, right? When the car's got a big advantage, Perez can afford to be 2-3 tenths off of Verstappen and he finishes second and third or second or third or whatever. When the Red Bull's struggling, that 2-3 tenth deficit becomes Perez struggling to get into Q3 or score meaningful points. It's a little bit like that in reverse for Piastri with how the season's gone, because those, first of all, they're vanishingly rare, and his off weekends really aren't terrible. But they were the difference, right? Like Norris was often scrapping for pole positions and podiums in those races that I mentioned, or certainly doing a very, very good job in the top 5 comfortably. Piastri, a little bit more anonymous than that. Zandvoort is kind of the closest he's come, and this would be kind of similar to the Zandvoort kind of vein of form, I would say, where he's just getting kind of beaten up by Norris from the first session. These are tricky tracks. This is a difficult one to kind of get into a rhythm on, and yeah, Piastri just never seemed quite as comfortable. So, as I said in my first answer, I just felt this was one where Norris was just the out-and-out number one driver for McLaren all weekend. This was a championship challenging caliber driver, a driver who doesn't need team orders and doesn't need to be bothered about being let by his teammate and how they're going to manage it and stuff like that, because he stuffed him and disappeared up the road.
Yeah, it's proper hit the ground running weekend for Norris. He was happy with the car pretty much from the start of FP1, didn't change it huge amounts. And yeah, just that step ahead. Piastri actually did make some good progress, and he was about 4 tenths off, just over 4 tenths off in qualifying. But he was getting closer, wasn't he, Mark? He did sort of 2/3 of a lap that wasn't so far off. And then he had that moment in turn 16 and the temperatures spiked, or he had the moment because the temperatures were starting to build.
Had he repeated his Q2 time, he would have been on the front row. It was just over a tenth slower than Norris's pole. But he just didn't have as fine control of the tyre temps, I think, when you look at where his lap time was bleeding away compared to Norris's. So in the first half of the lap, he was actually faster than Norris, but he was probably taking a little bit too much out of the tyres and doing that, and so he lost more in the latter half of the lap than he'd gained in the first. And that's just, that fine-honed feel that you get when you're at the absolutely on top of your game. And Piastri was scratching to reach that level of performance, whereas Norris was reaching it easily.
Yeah, and in the end, it was a nicely executed race, actually, for Piastri. He was fifth early on. He went, obviously, longer than Hamilton and Russell. Hamilton stopped on lap 17 really early. Russell stopped on lap 27. Piastri ran really long and stopped on lap 38 and then came through them and got through to third. So I think a good job for Piastri in the race. Obviously, couldn't do anything about Verstappen. Could have done had that qualifying lap been completed. There's a couple of quick strategy-related questions from the Race Members Club. I'll just throw at you, Mark. Rob O says, why was McLaren worried about Piastri losing a place to Hamilton by pitting? I thought once he was on fresh tyres, he would easily overtake Hamilton anyway.
Yes, I mean, it was they were looking at it in terms of track position, but it wasn't yet clear just how disastrously slow the McLaren was. It was looking like it was just on the wrong tyre. But yeah, it was slow on either tyre.
The Mercedes,
sorry, yeah, it was slow on either tyre. So yeah, that probably hadn't been fully appreciated at that early stage in the race. But yeah, he just ran way longer. So in addition to having an inherent car pace advantage, he also had a very big tyre advantage in the second stint.
Adam Hay also asked, did McLaren leave Piastri out for too long? It looks like they definitely had the fastest car all weekend. Could it be they left points on the table by leaving him out longer?
I don't think so. I think once he got stuck behind the Mercedes, the two Mercedes in that first stint, he was too far away to ever be a real threat to Verstappen. And when by the time he got onto the hard tyre, on which the McLaren wasn't quite as competitive as it had been on the medium, Verstappen was pretty much as quick. So I think if they'd brought him in sooner, I don't think it would have made any difference to the end result.
Yes, and of course, first and third for McLaren, 41 points now, the advantage in the Constructors' Championship. That's looking very, very good for them. 52 points, Norris is now behind in the Drivers' Championship, so some way still to go there. But Scott, how happy do you think Max Verstappen and Red Bull will be with this great damage limitation job in second place? Or you could say, how irritated will Lando Norris and McLaren be that it was Verstappen behind them? Because it looked like earlier in the weekend, Red Bull could be on for another nightmare weekend and in a much deeper hole.
Yeah, I think the way that Verstappen ended up mitigating the damage is very, very timely boost to his prospects. It's obviously not a win, and he has still had some of his championship advantage chipped away at. So it's not like the momentum has swung dramatically towards him or anything like that. But I think he has stopped the rot, because it was two races in a row that went very badly for him, and he was lucky not to lose more in those races. I don't think he did much in those races to mitigate the damage. It was kind of just for different reasons. McLaren didn't maximise it. Norris didn't maximise it. Here, Norris and McLaren maximised it on his side, but Verstappen did the job he needed to do to be able to soften the blow. I think that has significant consequences, both in numerical terms in the championship, because I've said this a few times before, but it keeps Verstappen above that 50-point threshold that I arbitrarily set to determine whether or not a championship fight's on or not. And it's just a good buffer, because it's two clear race wins that he just keeps clear of Norris with. But I think psychologically as well, because when you're having the weekends like he had in Monza and Baku, that's when Verstappen's saying, if we carry on performing like this, we've got no chance of winning the championship. Norris will overtake us. If he can keep finishing second and third, and especially now, I think he can now finish second in every single race and every single sprint race between now and the end of the year and still be champion, even if Norris wins absolutely everything. And obviously the bonus point swinging fastest lap, which we'll get into properly a bit later, had a bit of an impact on that, but it's in his control. Verstappen makes sure that it's in his control. And I just think when everything felt like it was kind of slipping away, it's a big deal for him to get back into second, especially as Red Bull does have upgrades coming and thinks it has found a better direction to go in with the car. So if Verstappen's just been able to ride out the toughest part of his season and still come out of it with a 52-point lead, then he should be fine to get over the line from here.
Mark, why would you say Red Bull managed to make that step from Friday to Saturday and then into Sunday, given they looked a bit all over the place and it looked like it might be similar territory to last year?
Well, it was last year that had spooked them, actually. And so they came here with a setup which was very soft. Because if you remember last year, they had awful problems over the bumps and the curbs. And it was similar to Monaco this year as well. And so they came here with what they thought was going to be a nice compliant setup, but found that with the resurfaced track, and the bumps had disappeared and the speeds were higher, actually it was inappropriately soft. And so they did a radical setup change overnight. Sebastian Buemi on the sim again, and came up with a much better setup for the next day, in which it still wasn't great, but it was enough to give Verstappen a front end, and that's all he needs to sort of hustle the car around, and that's what he had. Now, the Friday car was so far out of the window because it just wasn't generating the tyre temperatures. That I spoke to Pierre Vacher after the session, and he just said, when the car's like that, you don't even know what its balance is. He says, because you don't know what its natural balance is because the tyres aren't working. So you don't even know what you don't know yet. But at least they got the car working with the stiffer setup, and yeah, that was the key decision that really transformed their weekend from a really very bad one it might have been to a very respectable.
Yeah, it was a cracking turnaround from Red Bull. Really good performance from Max Verstappen. Couldn't have done better than second on the grid and second in the race. But he was helped a little bit, wasn't he, Mark? Because if you judge by Friday practice, it wasn't just that Red Bull went from looking in trouble to being in the fight, but you'd have bet all the money in the world on it being a Norris versus Leclerc battle. So why did Ferrari's weekend wither on the vine and turn into a P5 for Leclerc and P7 for Carlos Sainz?
Yeah, it all went wrong on Saturday, in qualifying in particular, but the seeds of it you could see in FP3 on Saturday, and it just wasn't easy to get the front tyre temperatures high enough for the beginning of the lap without the rear temperatures being too hot before the end of the lap, and they exacerbated that with their tyre preparation, and they were keen. Everybody was positioning themselves to not go out first, and they ran a very gentle pace, and they sat at the end of the pit lane for a bit too long, and there was a suggestion that the tyre blankets were maybe not set correctly, but Fred Vasseur denies that. But basically the tyres were just not in the window, and so that contributed towards Carlos Sainz's accident, which put him 10th, but it also left Leclerc in trouble. So with that, just that showdown Q3 lap at the end, that one single lap, he got his time disallowed, so that put him 9th, and that was it. You're behind three much slower race cars. You're behind the likes of Hülkenberg and Tsunoda and Alonso. And they're going to be a big blockage as the fast cars disappear up the road, and that's exactly what happened. And by the end of the first stint, Leclerc was 40 seconds off the lead. So you've still got another stint to do. So yeah, that was pretty much defined Ferrari. I think once he got in clear air, he was very, very quick again. Probably not far off Norris actually, but as I say, the two things about that. McLaren probably wasn't quite as good on the hard as on the medium, and the other thing is Norris by that time had almost a pit stop's worth of gap, so why would he be pushing?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, just to show how hard work it was for Leclerc, he didn't get past Alonso, the front of the midfield, until in the second stint, so it was a very long time, and Leclerc didn't pit till lap 36, so that was a long time mired down there. And yeah, Sainz, good recovery, had a very early stop. In fact, he was the first relevant driver to stop. That sounds a little bit harsh on Daniel Ricciardo, because we will talk about him later. He stopped earlier, but anyone else who stopped even earlier was really struggling. But yeah, Sainz was able to make that early stop and then sort of rise through to 7th, which was probably about as good as it was going to get, considering he was 12th on the first lap. He was obviously caught up in the sort of the general first corner. It wasn't carnage, but there was a little bit of kerfuffle in the first corner, and he was one of those who was annoyed with Franco Colapinto for having the temerity to overtake people at the first corner. We'll talk about that a bit more later.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Time now to tell you about the sponsor of this episode, Grammarly. Do you struggle with when to use fewer instead of less? Do you find yourself writing important emails which, when you look back on them, take far too long to get to the point? Are you guilty of exclamation marks and too much jargon? Well, Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you find the words you need and the right text for your context. It learns your personal style and your brand or company style to give you personalised suggestions based on what you're writing and who's going to read it. Grammarly works across all the apps and sites you use like Word, Google Docs, Pages, Slack and more, so there's no need to copy and paste. Grammarly works where you work. Smart features like tone suggestions help you navigate even the most difficult work conversations. And what's more, data privacy and security are woven into the foundations of Grammarly. It's the gold standard of responsible AI, with 15 years of best-in-class communication, trusted by tens of millions of professionals and IT departments. So get AI writing support that works where you work. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Grammarly. Easier said, done.
Well, let's talk about Mercedes now, Mark, because they were all over the place on Friday as well. They're pretty good on Saturday. They're not quick enough on Sunday. So how do you untangle that and make some sense of it?
They were a lot better on Saturday than they were on Friday. On Friday, they were probably even worse than Red Bull. Just again, for the same reason, the tyres just would not get into any sort of sensible temperature. So they had horrible understeer and they had useless traction, and the car was absolutely nowhere. So, yeah, big setup changes into Saturday. Further big setup changes between FP3 and qualifying. They finally began to get some sensible, grip from the tyres, and then they got some sort of balance. But it was never truly quick. And although they locked out the second row, as discussed, we've left Ferrari out. So, really that would have probably been had everyone got their laps together and everybody had their standard 2 Q3 runs, we would probably have been looking at them locking out the third row. So it was not a very quick car around here on the race, and it was poor on the soft and it was poor on the hard. So yeah, it was even Leclerc losing all that time in the first stint was right with George by the end, past Lewis and right with George. So yeah, it just wasn't a very effective car. Again, it sways all over the place from one track to the next, and they don't seem to have a very good handle yet on just how it's working its tyres.
And of course, George Russell finished fourth, which in the circumstances was good. Lewis Hamilton was sixth. Charles Leclerc was between them. But a quick question on Lewis Hamilton. Several members of the Race Members Club asked this. That's Matt, Ollie Barker and Christopher Partridge. Why did Mercedes start Hamilton on softs? That
was predicated on him beating Verstappen off the line. If he could beat Verstappen off the line, that potentially made a very good strategy possible. But as soon as he didn't do that, it was a disastrous strategy. And so, yeah, you'll have seen them rubbing wheels into that turn one. Max absolutely refusing to, give him any cooperation, which is absolutely as you'd expect. And Lewis basically just didn't make a good enough start with those tires to take advantage of those tires. And so that was it. He was brought in earlier than necessary in hindsight, but it was because they believed the poor performance was because the soft tire was just not very good. But they discovered as soon as they put the hard on that it wasn't any good on that either. So had they left him out longer, in hindsight, that would have been a better strategy. But had they started him on mediums, that would have been an even better one. But had he started on the softs and he'd beaten Verstappen into turn one, then it becomes quite an interesting race because you have the track position and you can't really pass with the same age tyres around here. So that first stint, he could have probably held that second place. So, yeah, it would have increased Norris's advantage, probably. But, it was one of those things where you look at it in hindsight and say, yeah, well, that didn't work. But it was worth a try, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And, sixth for Mercedes was roughly in the ballpark of where it should be. It's just that Russell had a sort of more straightforward race and got that good fourth place. Scott, there have been a few question marks in some quarters about Fernando Alonso of late, but does his second best of the rest race win, if you want to call it that, in a row in eighth place show he's still as good as ever, do you think?
I think so. And one of the things that is most impressive about both those performances is they've been earned through qualifying, which I think is fair to say that in general isn't really where Alonso absolutely excels. I think it's one of the things that even he admits. He doesn't think he's necessarily the best in every single element of being a driver, but he thinks he's the best driver when you put all those elements together. We've become very accustomed to him driving very intelligent races, very strategic races, very opportunistic races. But in Baku and then here, we've had Alonso grab track position basically and then not let go of it. Certainly not against the cars that he's actually racing. And I think that's what's most impressive, because there is that kind of Saturday speed where the car is capable of it. That the Aston Martin has been a more potent car on Saturdays than Sundays, certainly when it's in a better window. Sometimes it's just a bit of a pig to drive, so it's just a bit hapless all round. But you saw the difference this weekend between Alonso and Lance Stroll in terms of how they deal with that car, because Alonso was really struggling with it at one point in practice. And, there's the usual kind of, slightly extreme radio messages, comedic radio messages, but, they're there for a purpose. They're telling a story, but they're a little bit exaggerated. But they're rooted in the fact that the car is ultimately difficult to drive. Come qualifying, he nails it, while Stroll's making that car look like a backmarker, a Q1 exit car. So I don't think the car's that bad, but I think that car's a Q2 car, and it's probably a P11, P12 car, frankly. And Alonso is turning it into a top 10 car in qualifying and in the races. So once he got track position today, much like in Baku, I didn't really have any doubts that he would lose it. I thought he fought gamely against cars that were faster. He did very well to get to the head of that midfield group, considering Nico Hülkenberg was there initially. It's just, I think this was genuinely not in a negative way at all. I thought this was a slightly silly Alonso weekend, because I just don't think those Saturday or Sunday results should have really been achieved in that car.
Yeah, it was very, very, very similar to Baku, actually. Just hustling the car, really, taking those calculated risks. Tom McCulloch, the performance director, was saying this morning that Alonso can do that at tracks like this, but he doesn't like doing it very often during a weekend, because if you try and do that too much, you will end up in the wall. But then he's quick enough once he's there to just sit there. He did that in Baku, and he did that here. It was a little bit harder work here because he did have to get that track position from Nico Hülkenberg, as you said, but he got that with a 4-lap undercut. But Nico Hülkenberg, you'd have to say, Mark, another good weekend from him. Obviously, Baku went a bit wrong for him in the end, but he was pretty good for a track that's his bogey track. But here, just another strong weekend, even though he didn't quite get that Class B win. Yeah,
it's super fast in qualifying, which we've seen many times before. Probably flattered a little bit by circumstances with the red flag. But even so, to have got that car comfortably to the head of that class, ahead of the Williams, which looked very quick at certain times of the weekend, as did the RB, as well as Alonso's Aston. So, a standard Hulkenberg performance, really. Very high quality in qualifying and a good solid race.
And another couple of points for Haas in the championship. So they're really just starting to whittle down that advantage that RB have got. It's 3 points now. Haas on a little run of 3 points finishes in a row. Not great points finishes. I think 10th and 9th. But it's the first time this season they've scored in 3 consecutive events. And I think they're going to nick 6th at this rate because, Kevin Magnussen was back this weekend and did not have a good one, but Hulkenberg's looking like he's going to cash in on those results more often than not. And this was the first time that RB actually looked like a points threat and managed to throw it away. So I think it's advantage, even though numerically they're at a deficit. I think it's advantage Haas in that fight, and I think it would be a really big result for that team if it manages to steal 6th in the championship.
Well, RB haven't scored a point since before the summer break. That's 4 weekends without anything, and they're struggling a little bit. So, yeah, and I imagine Haas are a bit worried about Williams because it did look early in the weekend like Williams were going to be the class of that midfield. But, they ended up with no points. It looked like they could repeat that 10-point haul from Baku, but no points. Colapinto in 11th place and Albon retiring early on. But, yeah, the Williams, Albon was saying it does have a bit of a habit of slipping in and out of the window, and he said it was a bit all over the place in qualifying. It was a very messy lap and hard to drive. So it looked like, again, on Friday, you just said, even in FP3, you just said, the Williams will be there in Q3. But, just a little swing against it makes life very, very difficult. Mark, should we talk about Sergio Perez? Because he was kind of back in this place. We thought he'd maybe left behind. He finished 10th. So he's behind Hulkenberg and Alonso. Why was he struggling so much? He only just finished ahead of Franco Colapinto, who he followed around in the first stint and then managed to jump with an undercut in the pit stop. So a very laborious weekend for him.
Yeah, interesting. When the car was soft on Friday, he was quite respectable and probably slightly quicker than Max. Not that it meant very much because the car wasn't very good, but as soon as they stiffened it and give it a front end, and that the thing that enables Max to work his magic, that's when Checo became lost, which reflects pretty much what he's been saying all season about the direction of development of the car. And it's a little bit similar to the team's development direction in 2020 when they developed this car that had a front end which Max was able to deal with, but his teammates were falling further and further away from them. And until they got to the point where even Max was not finding any time from going any further in that direction, and they had to reverse out of it and start again. So, a little bit like a microcosm of that, really. But I don't think that's necessarily indicative of where they will be going for the remainder of the season. But I think that is what happened between Friday and Saturday. In giving Max a car that he could work with, and they give Checo a car that he really didn't like.
And of course, the die was very much cast by being 13th on the grid for him, so it was always going to be hard for him to make some gains. So, just the 1 point for 10th place for him. As I mentioned, Franco Colapinto was 11th. We can work down through a few people. Yuki Tsunoda was 12th. Esteban Ocon did a good job in the Alpine in 13th. Not much more you can do with that car. Lance Stroll, 14th, 4/10ths off Alonso in Q1, struggling with the inconsistent balance of that car. Zhou Guanyu beat Valtteri Bottas in the battle for 15th between the Saubers. Zhou passed him early on because Bottas was having some trouble with brakes, and then they were trying to hold each other in DRS. Zhou was backing off a bit to let Bottas stay in range. Didn't really help them a great deal, but they were doing what they could. Pierre Gasly 17th. And the reason I've just run down through those is we've got now down to position 18 and Daniel Ricciardo in the RB. So, Scott, it's unusual for the driver who finished 18th to be the one that draws the most questions from the Race Members Club. Daniel Ricciardo has, and that's because of the doubts about his future. We'll probably address some more of those in the upcoming midweek episode, but there's one question I've selected that best sums it up. It comes from Andrew Ferg, who says, was Daniel Ricciardo's last F1 driver fastest lap and driver of the day?
It looks like it very much could be, and my gut feeling is that it will be, based on how Ricciardo's demeanour changed through the weekend, what he was saying, how he was projecting himself, carrying himself after the race on Sunday. A couple of little things like I saw there was a little weird kind of guard of honour for him with some hospitality guests after the race outside the RB hospitality. He did
that was really weird. I was just down, but I was right next to that and thought this is very, very strange. What's going on there?
He also did which looked and felt like very much like a send-off interview with Sky, which included like a career montage and him talking through some of his biggest bits. He was quite, I think, at the start and end of the weekend, I think he was being chaperoned by Red Bull communication representative as well as his own team's representative. So it has very much had the air of Ricciardo's last dance, and I think it means his F1 career is over as well, because it's not just he's going to lose his RB seat to Liam Lawson next year. It looks like he's going to be replaced for the rest of this year's races, and with no Red Bull future, either at the second team or obviously in the senior team, which was his ultimate dream. There's no one really who wants him, even though there's technically one seat still available with Sauber. And Ricciardo doesn't want to be here anymore anyway. That's kind of the feeling I get. He's kind of talked about seriously doubting whether he can actually go at it with on a week-to-week basis with younger, better drivers. He feels that the level's been raised now, and maybe he can kind of match it at his best, but he can't match it every single time. And if there's no Red Bull Racing seat on the table anymore, he's accepting that he'll only be making up the numbers in the midfield if he tries to stick around. And he doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to hog a seat, but he's also, that's not fulfilling. And he's kind of questioning the purpose of continuing anyway. So yeah, he was very emotional post-race. I heard and watched a lot of the interviews that he did. Heard him speak, saw the sort of emotion that he carried in his voice and on his face, and when you can sort of see it in their eyes as well. Like he wasn't like full on welling up and like about to burst into tears, but there were a couple of interviews he did that did get emotional. You could see there was a little bit sort of borderline teary-eyed in places. So yeah, I think that is sadly, I do think that could very well be the last time we see Daniel Ricciardo race in Formula One. So he got the kind of token driver of the day almost, didn't he? Almost as recognition of his career. It was kind of a sort of lifetime achievement driver of the day kind of thing. And then got the fastest lap as well, which RB insists was. Bizarrely, Laurent Mekies, the team principal, has actually acknowledged the Ricciardo situation in their press releases. He said that given this may have been Daniel's last race, we wanted to give him the chance to savour it and go out with the fastest lap, which is the first time actually anyone senior at Red Bull has gone as far as saying this weekend that it very much could be his last race. They've danced around it. They hadn't denied it up to this point, but they hadn't acknowledged it in such terms as Mekies did in that statement.
It is a really weird situation because, as far as I know, the decision was as good as made that Lawson will be in next year. The situation for the last 6 races of the year wasn't set, and it doesn't sound like he's been officially told you are out. It doesn't sound like Red Bull have officially sat down and decided 100% you're out, but they seem to be going that way. So it's really odd, isn't it, Scott, that it's kind of gone this way. And I'd be intrigued to know whether Daniel Ricciardo has just sort of sees the narrative himself. He sees the writing on the wall and he thinks, yeah, this is what's going to happen, so I might as well enjoy a farewell that he's very much earned. It's not very well handled by Red Bull, you'd have to say, wouldn't you? And even if he then isn't dropped for the next 6 races, it's just created this really, really weird thing in Singapore.
I think it's been totally cack-handed. And Ricciardo might have pulled it back a little bit and given himself that kind of half kind of lap of honour almost in Formula One in the paddock. But I don't know how the two of you feel. I've actually felt it's quite disrespectful of from Red Bull, because mid-season driver changes are what they are. If a driver's not doing a good enough job, regardless of what that job is, because it's different for different drivers in different teams, it's always harsh to drop a driver mid-season, but it's often justifiable. And the way you justify it is in performance terms. Look at Logan Sargent at Williams. He was not at the level needed and he didn't look like he was going to get to the level needed. That's not the case with Ricciardo and RB. Ricciardo, okay, look, he wasn't on it in qualifying in Singapore, but he actually executed slightly odd strategy pretty well, I thought, and until that, obviously, might as well just do that free pit stop at the end and nick the point, not nick the point, but take the point away from Lando Norris and McLaren and give Ricciardo a little bit of a fake hurrah as a farewell. His Grand Prix was absolutely fine. And if this car is good enough to score points between now and the end of the season, I think Ricciardo's got almost as much chance of scoring points as Tsunoda. So it's not like he is not aiding what that team needs to achieve. But because he's not, the Red Bull Racing future anymore, and I've got a suspicion that they want to try Lawson for the last few races, not as a head start for his RB drive next year. I think they want to evaluate him to maybe replace Perez next year. All of that's kind of fine. You're not replacing him because he's tugging and he's not doing anywhere near a good enough job. You're doing it because you're kind of resetting the board for the future, which is absolutely fine. But I cannot believe it's been allowed to drag out the way that it has. Ricciardo went into this weekend insisting that while he knew that he'd have a decision on 2025 after this race, during this big break that we've got between now and Austin, but he was adamant that there was nothing, that as far as he was aware, there was nothing coming about his immediate future. He didn't rule it out. He said he's been in F1 long enough, and obviously with the way Red Bull is, you can never rule it out. He wouldn't bet his house on getting to Abu Dhabi. But he was not talking, you were there, Ed, he was not talking on Thursday like a driver who expected for this to be his last race. By Sunday, he was. And I think that's because he picked up on the speculation, picked up on the narrative, and realised, actually, I'm being done over here. I might be thrown out after all. Red Bull has not made any effort through the weekend to quell the speculation. If they've just let it grow and grow, it looks like it's going to happen. And I just think, considering he's performing at a perfectly kind of okay level, which isn't great, but it's okay, and everything he's done for the Red Bull organisation in Formula One, I just feel that he deserves a bit more than this. This doesn't feel like a normal kind. It's not a Sargent or a Nick de Vries kind of mid-season axing. I feel like I don't think this has hit the right kind of notes. I know that F1's not about sentiment, but I think this should have been handled a lot better.
Well, I think regardless of any sentiment or anything, you just do try and handle these things a bit better. I think Ricciardo himself has handled it with, in the very best possible way. All the way through this process this year, he's always, said the right things. He's talked about the need for his performance to be right. I asked him on Thursday, I said, do you feel like your performance level's a little bit in the middle? Because he's, the basic idea being, you've been okay for RB, you're sort of not good enough to catapult yourself into Red Bull, you're not bad enough to drop out of hand, you are just in the middle, which he said, well, I don't wish to be in the middle, but he gave a great answer to that question. I think he's conducted himself very well this weekend. Any sympathy for him, Mark?
Yeah, as a person, yeah, because I like him enormously. But as a performer, I don't think he should have been given the chance this year. I think the little cameo he did last year, the half season, was in combination with how well Liam Lawson performed. I don't think it merited a drive this year, and it's played out the way it's played out, which sounds a bit cruel, but I would have made the switch at the beginning of this season, if not earlier.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Performance is all important. I think the good thing is, even if it's ended messily, and we should say it, they've still not finally decided, even though it looks like they are going to fairly shortly. He's at least had the chance to go into another team other than McLaren. There was a shot at getting into an RB. So I think that'll make it easier for if it is the end in Formula One. He gave it a shot. He was able to measure himself and get some answers about his overall performance level. But yeah, very, very strange weekend.
George Clooney and Brad Pitt's new movie, Wolves, is on Apple TV Plus September 27th.
That's where I want you to be now.
So if you want to see George Clooney and Brad Pitt, go to Apple TV Plus.
You got to start the story there.
Or if you want to see Brad Pitt and George Clooney, go to Apple TV Plus.
I am enjoying the show.
And if you want to see their new movie, Wolves.
You can't do it, I'm going to help you out. I can do it, so do it.
Definitely go to Apple TV Plus.
Admit it, it's cool. Okay, fine, it was very cool.
Wolves, streaming September 27th on Apple TV Plus. Rated R.
When it comes to towing, seeing is believing. That's why Chevy Truck's advanced camera technology offers up to 8 available cameras for 14 unique views, so you can focus on the view that really matters. Chevrolet, together let's drive. Learn more about Chevy trucks at Chevy.com. Safety or driver assistance features are no substitute for the driver's responsibility to operate the vehicle in a safe manner. Read the Vehicle Owner's Manual for important feature limitations and information.
Hey besties, listen up. I have a secret to tell you. LinkedIn now has improved the job search experience for nurses. Search by your specialty, the shifts you want to work, and the salary that you want to make. With so many employers hiring on LinkedIn, finding the perfect job is even more simplified. So don't spend months searching. Go to linkedin.com/nurses and find out why in the past year, more than 1.5 million nurses have used LinkedIn to search for their next role. That's linkedin.com/nurses.
Well, as always, we'll devote the final part of the podcast to questions from the Race Members Club. If you're interested in the Race Members Club, head to Patreon, click the link in the episode description for this podcast. Asking questions to us on our post-race podcast is just one of the many benefits. You get exclusive members podcasts, all sorts of things. And yeah, you're very, very welcome to join us if you'd like to participate. We'll get through some questions today and we'll tackle some more in the upcoming gap between races. So Mark, first up, question from Nabil. A V-carb driver stopping Red Bull's main competitor from getting an extra point for the championship. Coincidence?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Who knows whether there were conversations had beforehand about whether it might be a nice idea or whether it really was just contained within one organisation. I don't think we'll ever know.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it because the rules allow it. And as I said to you, Scott, in a message, I said if I was RB, I'd be throwing softs at their cars to try and take the fastest lap off Norris because of the championship. But related to that, a question for you, Scott, from Florian Schneeweiss, who says, after Daniel Ricciardo's fastest lap, do you believe that Red Bull has opened Pandora's box regarding owning two teams again?
Yeah, it has, because it has to, because I understand. I do take your point that the rules allow it, and Mark's right. We can't sit here and say for certain that it did it for this reason. I think Ricciardo did allude to the fact that he knew that there might be an opportunity to do it, and said openly as well that he thought he'd maybe get himself a good Christmas present from Max this year if Verstappen goes on to win the championship by a single point. But it's a problem that it's even possible. That's kind of the core issue that I see it, because we've talked about this way back. I think that there's something wrong with a single entity owning more than one team, and I know that this is a consequence of the past, and I don't think Red Bull should be forced to sell. But I think we've talked about this between us, Ed, and probably on the podcast as well, that it needs to be kind of not allowed in the future, because there's too much at stake. And even the talk and speculation about collusion and race manipulation and sporting ethics is a problem for F1 and a problem for the Red Bull brand and for the teams involved. So yeah, it's already led to calls from fans. I think McLaren have kind of expressed their kind of curiosity about how it played out, and I think Zach Brown, who has been very vocal about this, is bound to be pushing for answers. I don't think they're going to take issue with this instance exactly, because you kind of can't really prove anything. I think if you dug deep enough, you might be able to start finding some trails, but it might all end up being circumstantial anyway, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, the fact that it was done, yeah, the circumstances allow it. I don't like it. We kind of have to go along with it at the moment, but I would like for this kind of thing to not be possible in the future. And I think you might have said this a long time ago, Ed, but the neatest solution is kind of to gently encourage Red Bull to cede ownership of the second team at its earliest convenience.
Exactly, yeah, that's probably the best way to do it, because you can't just tell them they can't own the team. It doesn't quite work like that. But yeah, I think it's something that in the long term needs to be looked at. On a related note, a question from Sean Murphy that I'll take. After Ricciardo was brought in late to grab the fastest lap, do you think the point for fastest lap should be dropped for next season? At the rate Norris is catching Verstappen, there's a possibility fastest lap points could decide the championship. The nightmare scenario would be a back marker being called into the pits to throw on a set of softs in Abu Dhabi late on, and the championship being won or lost that way.
Here we go.
Yeah, should it be dropped? Should it be dropped for next season? Yes, 1,000 times yes. It is a stupid rule. Fastest lap is profoundly situational. Very, very often it is only available to people who've underachieved. They've got this, you've got to be in the top 10 to get it, because it's such a stupid achievement that doesn't mean anything with the way the tyres work. And when people do get fastest laps with these, like Ricciardo, that wasn't a qualifying lap from Ricciardo probably. It would have been a decent lap, but you've just got so much more grip resource than anyone on low fuel. Many times in the past, if you've got a split in the field, if you're at the back of the lead group, you get to take the fastest lap point for being the worst performer in the lead bunch. It is a stupid point. It always has been. So from that perspective, I don't like it. And yeah, the potential for a championship being decided by something stupid, what we saw today, it's just stupid, and the point for fastest lap has to go. Some championships have it and it works because of the way the racing works, the tyres, the way the performance profiles work, but not in Formula One.
And what do you think about sprint races and signage at Formula One events and parking and things like that?
Let's not get into that. Mark had a point to make, so I will cede the floor before I filibuster.
I'm amused by Ed's how irritated he gets about the fastest lap point. I can't say I feel as strongly about it, but the very fact that Ed is so irritated about it swings it for me. I'm just behind Ed with it.
The fact it winds Ed up so much actually makes me think that we should keep the bonus point. Because I actually
you could look at it that way as well.
I inherently hate the bonus point for fastest lap, but if it irritates Ed this much that we get this level of kind of anger from him, then maybe it serves a purpose after all.
Anything that creates good podcast material, that's good enough for us. Mark, a question from Rob O. If Lando Norris backed up Max Verstappen into Piastri, would that be like a double-edged sword, as it would give less points for Max, but Piastri would be closer to Norris in the standings? So this is the idea that they could have tried to back Verstappen up with Norris to get Piastri past him. That would have been bold.
It would have been very bold, perfectly doable, but yeah, it would have been tricky. It would have been tricky to do. May have ended up in an incident, I think, because Verstappen would have been very well aware of what the game was. But yeah, I mean, depends how you want to conduct your campaign. I don't get the sense that they would want to conduct the campaign in that way, but yeah, but in theory, possible to do.
Yeah, there'd have been a lot of seconds to back him up, though, given the way the race played out. I don't think they'd particularly worry about Piastri getting closer to Norris in the standings because of that, but I think it's more just the practicality. Scott, a question from Yap Reuter, who says, was Norris's performance a touch too patchy on Sunday? A few errors here and there that he got away with. Are you convinced that he's up to the task of challenging Verstappen?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier he did get away with a couple that could easily have wrecked his race, and I think he will need to kind of reflect on that. He'll need to understand exactly what it was in that moment that he got wrong, what he could have done to avoid it. If it was just a lapse of concentration, if it's a hydration thing in very hot races, as Mark alluded to earlier. But yeah, I think he will just take more from the sort of crushing nature of the weekend as a whole. The fact he was so fast, the fact that he finally nailed the start, the fact that he got the job done in such emphatic circumstances. Yes, he rode his luck. He lived incredibly dangerously. A lot of drivers don't get away with one mistake in Singapore, let alone two. But he did come through it. Whether or not he has what it takes against Verstappen, I think it's difficult to say. There have been a few moments now where in kind of crunch kind of phases of races, especially that, the start, the first lap, but also little bits here and there where Norris hasn't been quite robust enough. Certainly not against a driver like Verstappen. But we've also seen moments where he has not been afraid to really take the fight to him. So I think with the pace and confidence that he can have at his best, and the fact that he isn't kind of overawed against Verstappen, I think that will count for just as much as the kind of uncertainty over just how strong Norris can actually be. And I also think if he had Verstappen right behind him, I don't think he has a lapse in concentration because he's going to be hyper-focused in those moments. It's all kind of ifs and buts, but yeah, I wouldn't extrapolate too much the errors in this race into a can he beat Verstappen? Does that mean he doesn't have the mettle to beat Verstappen? I think it's a little bit more complex than that. It's a little bit more nuanced. And the ideal scenario, I think, for us is that Red Bull does sort his car out. Verstappen does get back into challenging for race wins properly, and we do see him and Norris go wheel to wheel before the season's over.
Related to that, a question from Jasper Pendlebury that I'll take. With Lando Norris converting a win from pole in significant style, albeit with some adventures, will this be the confidence boost to loft him into a championship headspace? And does Ed finally think Lando is a championship challenger? Yeah, I think it will help in terms of confidence. It's only his third win. He's still sort of learning to be a race-winning, front-running, championship-contending driver. So this will be a help. I don't think it's a sudden flick a switch and it changes, but it's part of that process. Championship challenger, it's 52 points now. There's 174 points left. He's not quite there yet for me still. He can win the championship, but I was thinking if, let's say, he took 15 points out of Verstappen and it was about 44 points thereabouts, you'd start to think, okay, right, we're there. There's a championship fight kind of starting to happen there, but it's still a long way. 52 points is still quite a lot. And you can look at all those, if Norris wins with Verstappen second, calculations, all you like. But there's a lot of things still to go on in this championship. And, it could be Norris has a DNF tomorrow. However, tomorrow he's not going to because there's not a race. In the next race, which is about 6 months away in Austin because of the gap, then suddenly Verstappen's as good as won the championship. So he's just got to keep chipping away. And for me, it's just a question of Norris just needs to go out and win races. The reason I say he's not quite in the championship fight yet is he doesn't have to think about that beyond just win the races. When it starts to get a little bit closer, it's a little bit more about that. And even if you took those 11 points from those 3 races, Austria, Sprint, and the 2 obvious Grand Prix, where he could have been let past Piastri, would still only be 11 points less than 52 and still a long way to go. So, yeah. He can win the championship, but it's just not quite. He's not quite latched into that slipstream of Verstappen yet. Verstappen's still in a very good position, even with car struggles. Mark, a question from Jake Nelson. How much of the setup requirements for this race changed since the track changed for last year's race?
Yeah, quite a bit. And as we saw most notably with Red Bull, it's faster, it's less bumpy, it puts a different strain on the tyres, and it puts everything into just a slightly. You don't need to change very much in terms of what the tyres need to have quite a significant impact on your setup, and that's not just wing levels. That's also, where you put the ballast and what spring rates and have roll stiffness and all those things. It can be quite fundamentally different. I think if the car is robust like the McLaren, where it operates well over a wide range of conditions, probably less radically. It's probably changed less radically from last year to this, the demands of the circuit. But if you've got a car that's on the edge of a particular trait, like the Ferrari was, and like the Mercedes and the Red Bull were in different ways, then yeah, it can be quite fundamentally different.
Next question, Scott, getting to one of the big talking points of the weekend from Andrew Ferg. The whole stopping swearing over the radio just seems odd. Why don't they just not broadcast those messages? Also, coming from FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem, who is an ex-driver, you'd think he'd know how it feels to be behind the wheel of a racing car. Just as an aside, if you want to see what he's like behind the wheel of a Formula One car, have a look on YouTube. It's quite fun. Scott.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm gonna have to remind myself of that after this podcast, because you're right, that is a fantastic clip. So not broadcasting the messages is actually behind the kind of the Ben Sulayem FIA message that we heard a lot about going into the Singapore weekend. He wants there to be, even though it's censored, even though it's bleeped out, he wants it to be less on the broadcast. And remember, there are ways of watching on boards now. If you've got an F1 TV subscription, you can follow on board. And although that has a tiny delay, it's not so much that swearing gets bleeped out. I think if there was something utterly egregious, they might be able to nip in time. But generally, you hear it uncensored. There's certainly not the delay. It's like maybe like 4 or 5 second delay on that onboard. Whereas obviously when we hear the radio on the world feed, that has been properly curated. It's had a lot more time. It could be half a minute or a minute after, maybe even longer sometimes. So that's got proper censorship to it. That in itself isn't necessarily a problem, nor is the wider principle of let's try and get a little bit less swearing in broadcasts in the FIA press conference, which is what Verstappen fell foul of. And ironically, Verstappen didn't actually swear in his answer about the the kind of not swearing ban, but this kind of clamp down on driver language. Basically, he actually did it in a completely different answer where he referred to he was trying to describe his car not working in an optimal manner last year, and so he said the F word, and he got a penalty for it. It was a really weirdly worded way of doing it, but he's basically got a bit of community service to do, and that's the problem. It's handled. It's the second time I'm saying cack-handed in this podcast, amusingly, but it was handled terribly by the FA. It didn't feel like it needed to be done so heavy-handedly. He got a summons. He got punished for it, and it was unnecessary. It made it so pointlessly public. It was a bit embarrassing. And yeah, I joked about it at the start, and I apologise. That whole skit at the beginning of the podcast probably wasn't very funny, but it amused us, and that's all that matters. But Verstappen's kind of way of handling it, I thought, was good, because the FIA weren't conspicuous about this, so why should Verstappen be in response? And I just think there's this kind of role model agenda that Ben Sulayem has, but he goes about it in the worst way possible. You know, going into the weekend when absolutely hated the way he said, you know, we're not rappers, so why we shouldn't swear so much. And Hamilton...
That was a very problematic way of framing it.
As Hamilton said...
I found that a lot more offensive than the use of the F word.
Yeah, like, absolutely. And Ben Sulayem's got this remarkable ability, in quote marks, to do this, where he takes a grand stand against something and is somehow much more offensive or problematic in the way that he tackles the thing that he is kind of railing against. He makes the thing that he's got a problem with seem so trivial compared to how he goes about it. And yeah, it's a real problem. It's a needless soapbox to be standing upon. I think it reflects a certain something about the character involved. And I have a feeling it was kind of enforced this weekend a bit begrudgingly from other people in the FIA, who my gut feeling is I don't think a lot of people buy into what Ben Sulayem's trying to sell here. The principle's fine, but the way of handling it is just so out of kilter.
Yeah, related to that, the next question from Mark Paffin that I'll take. He says, Max Verstappen is from the Netherlands, and whereas in the UK and the US, the F word is always beeped, in the media in the Netherlands, it never is. Yes, in the feed, but not in the commentary or in any other form of media. So it's understandable that Max really does not get what the problem is. He's grown up without this kind of censorship of swear words. It seems unnecessary censorship and really a bit childish. Why the FIA now acting so harshly towards this? I saw the comment from the FIA president, but should the stewards not act independently from the president? Yeah, a few things in there. Verstappen did say in his defence, obviously it's second language, it's not necessarily realising the impact of it. I mean, no, Verstappen understands where that word might be considered, and I think if it's about the whole heavy-handedness thing, if they just go onto the drivers and just say, look, in FIA press conferences, just try, you know, it's some people find the swearing offensive, just try and avoid it. Not make it a huge thing, accept people have slips from now on. From time to time, don't worry about stuff in the car, because I'm sorry, if your heart rate's at 150 or whatever, you've done an hour of racing, you've just had a collision with someone, you're in the wall or something, or they've done something, you can pretty much say what you want within reason. That clamping down on swear words there is complete nonsense. But yeah, I think it's the way it's been done that seems to have annoyed Verstappen. It's misconduct he was done for, which to me massively belittles what misconduct can be, to be honest. It's in the International Sporting Code. So yeah, it's clearly something that they want to do. I can see why the FIA might want to do it. I'm very neutral on swearing. It's not a fastest lap issue for me. When I was editor of Autosport, I took the sort of the broadsheet newspaper approach, or if you're reporting something and it's a necessary word, you run it. I'm not a huge fan of starring things out. The race has a different editorial policy, but every outlet has to have its own view on it. And in fact, for example, in the UK for TV, there are certain broadcasting standards you have to adhere to. So it's not just Sky Sports F1, what they want to do. It's how they have to do it. So it's not a completely ridiculous thing to want to try and just sort of gently say, let's just try and stop this. But the way they've done it, yeah, very, very heavy-handed. It's clearly been driven by Ben Sulayem. Should the stewards not act independently from the president? Yes, the president can't sort of tell them what to do, but you can set out this kind of framework of, look, this is what we're trying to crack down on. So on that sort of thing, that's a little bit different to if Ben Sulliam got on the phone and said, oh yeah, this protest, chuck them out. That you can't do. But this sort of thing's a little bit different. So yeah, very, very heavy-handed. And I thought Max Verstappen's response to it was brilliantly executed. It wasn't petulant, it was calm, it was relaxed, dignified, and I think it showed, in contrast to the way that things were done, the right way to do these sorts of things. And all the other drivers pretty much, well, all of them, I think, are behind him on this particular one. We will probably talk about this a little bit more on a later podcast, but yeah, good to have a bit of a chat about it. Now, Mark, on a different topic, a question from Ben Gary. Could Franco Colapinto or Williams have done anything to get a point, or was 11th the best he could achieve on the day?
I think it was, actually. He held off Perez for that first stint. That was, he's clearly in a slower car, and he was undercut, and that really was that was 10th place. So I think he did a remarkable job in his third Grand Prix. He upset his teammate by dive bombing him in the first corner, and a few of the rest of the grid, but he made it work. And I thought he showed terrific spirit again, and a lot of discipline at a place where it's very easy to hit something solid. And he just continues to impress.
Yeah, he's enhanced his reputation no end in this 3-race stint as it is so far, and he's got many more to come. Scott, connected to that, a question from Stuart Coulter. I was impressed again by Colapinto's drive, particularly his first corner manoeuvre on lap 1. His teammate Alex Albon appeared to get quite flustered by this, complaining that this is a dive bomb. Is he starting to feel pressure from his young Argentinian teammates? And Gavin Cameron asked a similar question, saying, loved Colapinto's first corner move. What do you guys think? And is Albon feeling a wee bit threatened, hence his annoyance? I really liked his first corner move, so I'll quickly answer that one before you, Scott. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I thought it was very, very well done. And despite a couple of drivers, including Albon, kind of getting RC at the time, and I think Sainz made a comment after the race or whatever. Like, actually, Colapinto gets it slowed down. He doesn't hit anybody. And he actually manages to somehow keep his sort of trajectory quite tight on the exit. So he has a little bit of a kick from the rear, but he does a very good job of actually keeping out of everybody's way. I think he just caught everybody out and distracted them more than anything else. Look, it was a high-risk manoeuvre. I'm not 100% sure how much he thought it through in terms of how many cars he was actually going to end up overtaking. But he did a really good job of keeping it under control, and I don't think it merited any criticism. And I got the impression, kind of hearing what Albon said afterwards, I feel like he kind of migrated more towards that view, having been frustrated in the car. I don't think he's feeling the pressure from Colapinto in that kind of context. I actually think in qualifying, having the second car like right there with him will be where Albon has a bit more pressure on him, because track position's everything. And I think, as we saw in Baku, obviously Colapinto's clearly doing a really good job, but it's hard to piece together the whole Grand Prix, each stint maximising everything. So Albon will always have that edge, well, certainly for now, will always have that edge over him. So I think once Albon's in front, it's kind of not a problem. I suspect the frustration there was actually born more from the fact that Williams has got a great opportunity at the moment with the way that they've upgraded this car to score points in every race. And Albon had a really good start and was probably a little bit annoyed with how it went away from him. I don't really know how much of it was his fault, but he got caught a little bit in no man's land. He was on the outside of one of the Ferraris. He was always going to run out of room, I think, regardless of what happened with Colapinto on the inside. And then he didn't kind of do the going off in the runoff and rejoining quite as cleanly as he could have done, so he lost more ground. And it was a frustrating missed opportunity for him. And that's why I think that's where that annoyance boiled over, rather than necessarily reacting to pressure from Colapinto.
Yeah, very much so. And I like Colapinto's approach. I think he's trying to absolutely make the most of this opportunity to change his career trajectory. And yeah, there was a bit of a high-risk move at the start in terms of whether someone might have turned in on him. But yeah, I had no problem with it. He didn't misjudge it. He got the car turned in. And yeah, if there's a big space up the inside, then there is a danger somebody will put their car in it. So yeah, good start for Colapinto. And yeah, very much I was there after the race. I asked Albon about it before he did his TV interviews, and he very much sort of calmed it down a bit. And I don't think that was just, I've been told not to hang my teammate out to dry. I think he probably sort of seen it and thought, yeah, it's just one of those things. But yeah, what a great start to Colapinto's unexpected F1 career. Well, thanks very much, Mark and Scott. Thanks to everyone who sent in questions. We're going to keep podcasting through this new break that's coming on. It's not a proper break like the August break with shutdown, but sometime to the United States Grand Prix. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.
College football is back like never before. I'm David Ubben, and I host Until Saturday, The Athletic's leveled up college football podcast. 3 times a week, you'll hear me and my co-hosts, fellow Athletics senior writer Chris Vanini and 2-time national champion Damian Harris, embrace the sport's new madness with you. We're also just going to have a ton of fun enjoying all the things that make college football great. Check out the brand new Until Saturday every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday this fall. You can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts.